Okay, in this video we will start to talk about some of the terminology behind this stuff with the classes and object-oriented programming and start to kind of explain this stuff a little bit more. So this topic is object-oriented programming, also known as OOP. Just for an abbreviation. Okay, let's go back to our previous example. We had our car, C. And so this is really two things. This is known as our class. And then this is our instance of a class. Okay, and hopefully you understand the difference. So say a class is a Ford Mustang. We can talk about Ford Mustang really abstractly. It's not really anything that exists. It's the idea of a Ford Mustang. And then, so that's when we talk about our class, we're talking about things sort of abstractly and the definition of a Ford Mustang. When we have our instance, we are talking about a specific Ford Mustang, one that just rolled off the assembly line or sitting in a parking lot in some shopping center somewhere. This is a very concrete instance of an actual Ford Mustang. So then when we start to call our functions, our methods, and we'll sort of be loose with the term a little bit, so you can use them interchangeably just so you understand what they are. So when we say c.shiftUp, we're changing that instance of the class. We're taking it out of park and we're driving it down the road. A very specific, concrete instance of a class. We're not driving all Ford Mustangs that ever existed or ever could exist all at the same time. That's what really this thing is. With this one on the left here, this right here. When we talk about the class, we're talking about kind of more abstractly. When we talk about the instance of a class, we're talking about a very specific Ford Mustang. Okay? And you can have multiple Ford Mustangs. You can be doing all kinds of different things with them at once. And maybe we'll do that later, but for now we'll just stick to one. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense so far. Let's kind of move on, but not too far away to another topic, and we'll bring it back to what we've learned so far. So we have what's known as our state, and then we have behavior. Okay, so let's speak of state first. So when we're talking about state, we tend to be talking about variables. So say we've got our car C, and one of its variables was the gear. We shift the gear up. We've changed the state. We've modified one of its variables, and so now if we were to check the state of it, it's not the same state as it was. It initially started off at gear 0, and then at this point it has a new state because we've changed the state. It's now in gear 1, and the way we change state is what's known as behavior. And so when we talk about behavior, we're typically talking about functions. And this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but this is just so you can understand things. Sometimes it's better to be simple and not quite 100% correct and actually have you understand it. So as we can see here, so we had our, so if we were to do a C out on our C.gear, we would see that it's in a new gear because we've changed the state through behavior. We've called this function shift up on our instance of the class, and now it has a new gear. It doesn't change all cars ever existed. We're just changing this one specific car. So hopefully that makes some sense. If not, you may need to read the book or look for other resources on it. Sometimes you just need it explained a couple different ways, so that might be a suggestion. One more thing I should just go over here real quick is a lot of times this object-oriented programming stuff when we're dealing with classes. So we've talked about kind of real-world things with classes so far, cars and animals and robots and whatever, and that probably makes sense. What we're a lot of times going to be dealing with is things that are a little more abstract. So we might deal with a database class, and then we can call some. So we can with a database we might have it starts off with no connections, and then we might call db.start, and then it brings it online, and then people might connect to that database, and so the state changes. It might go from 0 connections to 5. We might insert records into that database. So we'd have a function that would insert records, and then we would the state would change. You might have a network connection. So we say connection con, and then we call, and then we connect to something, say Google. And then we do some things with Google, and so our connection has a state, and we use some behavior. So sometimes you might be working with slightly more abstract things than just animals and cars and so forth. So what you'll notice is the general trend is especially with the previous example I went over, you don't have to deal with such low-level things anymore. The idea behind object-oriented programming is that you're starting to abstract away and work with higher-level things. You're not so closely tied to the machine, to the computer memory, and you have to use pointers less as often because typically you can change the instance of the class through functions, and so you don't have to pass around pointers and memory addresses and all this other stuff. The object can kind of self-mutate, self-change, and there's much more simple ways to do that. So you start to think in terms of objects and higher level things and nouns and verbs, and the idea is that you can. It's kind of debatable maybe whether you can write a program faster, but it definitely makes it easier to think about and design a program when you get to think about things in terms of classes than and that's kind of a general statement. Maybe some people can write a program faster because in the other way, what's known as procedural programming, but I'll just make the general statement that we're kind of starting to abstract away and work with more real world things, and hopefully this makes your lives a little bit easier. It might seem at first that we're going to make things more complicated, but once you really get used to this object-oriented programming stuff, it really tends to actually make your life a lot more simple.